Today on Sugar Spun Run, I'll be showing you how to make homemade strawberry Pop-Tarts. Hey Sugar Spun Bakers, Sam here, and today I am so excited to be sharing another carefully tested, well-researched, and perfected recipe. We are going to be making homemade Pop-Tarts, starting with a homemade pastry crust, which is basically my pie dough. Nice, flaky, so flavorful. I think you're gonna love it, so let's go ahead and get started. If you've made my pie dough before, you know I always like to do this in a food processor. Makes really quick work out of the job. So if you have a food processor, go ahead and pull that out right now. Now in the basin of our food processor, we're going to combine 2½ cups of all-purpose flour, 1 tablespoon of granulated sugar, and a ½ teaspoon of table salt. Now we are just going to briefly pulse these dry ingredients together just until they're combined. Now the next thing you're going to need is 1 cup of unsalted butter. Now you want this to be nice and cold, and as you can see, I've cut mine into cubes. I'm just gonna scatter that evenly over the surface of our flour mixture. And once again, we're just going to pulse the ingredients just until the butter is cut into the flour ingredients. And you do want to pulse it, which means we're just turning that on and off, so that way everything gets well combined. All right, now I do want to pause for just a second so I can show you exactly what this mixture looks like. There are still discernible pieces of butter remaining in here. The mixture looks like coarse crumbs. You may have butter pieces remaining that are still as large as a pea or a chocolate chip. That's perfect. I don't want to go any further at this point. Now the next thing you'll need is my secret ingredient for when I make pie crust, and that is a ½ cup of full fat sour cream. I'm just gonna drop this over the surface. And once again, we're just going to pulse everything together just until the mixture begins to cling together. All right, this looks pretty good. So now I am just going to want to take this out of the basin of my food processor. Always remove the blade, you don't want to cut yourself on that. You are going to want to form this dough into a rectangle. You could just use your hands and do this on a clean, lightly floured surface. I like to do this right on the plastic wrap that I'm going to be wrapping my dough in. I'm just going to use my hands to form the dough together. I like to form it into a rectangle because it's going to make it easier when I'm cutting out rectangles for my Pop-Tarts. And I like to flatten it, so I get it nicely wrapped up and nice and flattened. All right, now this is going to need to chill before we can roll it out. So we're going to take it over to the fridge where it will need to chill for about 45 to 60 minutes. While that is chilling, we're going to head over to the stovetop and prepare our strawberry filling. Now you just need a small saucepan to prepare the filling for today's recipe. And in this, I'm going to combine 1/4 cup of granulated sugar with 2 teaspoons of cornstarch, which is going to help thicken this jam filling. Now just briefly whisk these together because you want to break up any lumps that might be in the cornstarch. And next we are going to be using 8 ounces of quartered strawberries. Add those right in. We're also going to add 2 teaspoons of lemon juice and stir everything together so it's nicely combined. All right, now turn your stovetop heat to medium, and we are going to stir pretty much constantly until the berries release their juices. So once this is looking nice and juicy, I like to grab myself a potato masher, and I am just going to mash these berries until they're pretty well pulverized. Now personally, I like to have some discernible pieces of strawberry left in my Pop-Tarts. I just prefer it that way. But if you like a smoother jam filling, you could use an immersion blender, or you can mash them even further than I do. That way you have more of a jam-like consistency. Now we're going to continue to cook this, and you'll notice it's probably going to bubble. That's totally fine. We're cooking out some of the excess water and allowing it to thicken. You want to keep cooking until this begins to approach a jam-like consistency, but keep in mind that this is going to continue to thicken as it cools once we take it off the stovetop. So you don't want to let it go all the way to the point where there's no water left and it's like a paste. You want it to be similar to a slightly loose jam. This is looking pretty good, so I'm going to take it off the heat at this point, and I'm going to add in a ½ tablespoon of butter and just stir that in until it's nice and melted. Now this is going to need to cool completely before you can use it to fill your Pop-Tarts. I will usually let it cool on the countertop for a couple minutes, and then I'll pop it in the fridge where I will let it cool completely before I proceed. Okay, so once your pastry dough is about finished chilling and your jam filling is nice and cool, you're going to want to preheat your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. My pastry dough has chilled, so I'm going to transfer it to a clean, lightly floured surface. And we're just going to roll this out until it's between 1/8 and 1/4 inch thick. Now, as you're rolling it out, do not be afraid to add flour as you need to. Another thing I like to do is periodically scrape with a spatula underneath the dough and add additional flour beneath as needed, because I don't want this dough completely stuck to my counter to the point where when I go to make my rectangle Pop-Tart cutouts, I'm not able to get those off the counter without wrinkling them and making a mess. Okay, this is looking pretty good, so now I'm going to cut this into rectangles. You can use a knife, a pastry cutter, a pizza cutter if you want. I am using a cookie cutter. You just want to make sure you're cutting 2.5 by 4-inch rectangles. I'm going to cut these out and I'm going to transfer the rectangles to a parchment paper lined baking sheet. And we're just going to be working with half of the dough at this point, just so I can show you how to assemble them. But of course, you are going to want to cut out as many squares or rectangles as possible. And then any scraps, just regroup them and re-roll them out so you get as many Pop-Tarts as possible. All right, now half of these rectangles are going to be the bottom half of my Pop-Tart and the other half are going to be the top, obviously. Now for the first half, we're going to be brushing these with some egg wash. To make an egg wash, you're just going to beat together 1 large egg, really any size egg would be fine, and a teaspoon of water. We're gonna whisk these together until they're really well combined. Now just use the pastry brush to lightly brush half of our Pop-Tart rectangles. These are the bottom halves. We're just brushing the entire surface really lightly. This is going to help keep the Pop-Tarts from getting soggy, and it's also going to help the top half adhere to the bottom half. All right, now grab your jam and we are going to add about a heaping tablespoon of jam to the center of each Pop-Tart. My jam's even still a little bit thin. You could go a little thicker than this on the stovetop if you want, but this is really fine too. Okay, now we'll grab one of these other rectangles of dough and we'll just gently place it on top. And then use a fork to crimp around the sides to seal in that filling. And if you have any jam leak out, it's not really a big deal. Just use your finger to wipe it clean. Now we're going to brush the surface of each Pop-Tart again lightly, a little bit of egg wash. Now we are going to take these over to our preheated oven where they're going to need to bake for about 15 to 17 minutes. You can also look for the edges to begin turning a light golden brown color. All right, now these look perfect. We are going to need to let them cool completely though before we cover them with our glaze. But while they're cooling, let's go ahead and prep that glaze. We'll start with 1.5 cups of powdered sugar. Now I have 2 tablespoons of milk here, but I'm only gonna add about half of that for now. We're also going to add 1 tablespoon of light corn syrup, it's going to help the icing dry nice and hard and shiny, just makes it look nice. We'll also add a 1/4 teaspoon of vanilla extract, and then just whisk everything together until the mixture is nice and smooth and lump-free. So I can see at this point, I definitely need more liquid, so I'm just going to add more milk as needed until I have a nice, smooth consistency. Now for this icing, what you're looking for to know it is the right consistency and it's not just going to be super thin and run right off the Pop-Tarts is you want to lift your whisk out of the bowl, and then that ribbon that falls down should hold its shape for a couple of seconds before dissolving back into that bowl of icing. This looks pretty good. So once our Pop-Tarts are cooled, we can go ahead and decorate them. Now I just like to drizzle a nice spoonful of glaze right on the center. And then of course we need sprinkles because Pop-Tarts need sprinkles. And all that's left to do at this point is let the glaze harden and you are ready to enjoy. And that is how easy it is to make homemade strawberry Pop-Tarts. I hope you guys love this recipe. It's better than anything you're ever going to get in a box at the store. If you tried this one out, please leave me a comment and let me know what you think. I always love hearing from you. Thank you so much for watching and I will see you next time.